Doucette's going to join remotely when he can. And,
he is.
And Howard Pearl's going to be late, but he's coming. So.
Is Greg Lakey, is he a member of the? Yep. Yeah. So I need to update him and make him a costs.
Well, really, if he's remote, he won't be able to join the subcommittee.
Correct. He could be on
At
just
10:30.
but he could listen in to
on the
recycling,
yeah.
or call into somebody who's in the other groups sitting there.
Yeah. Which
we can do that. We can use a cell phone call in, or we can get a I call them back phones, one of those finger phones. The problem is the two rooms are next to each other, and if there's two of them going, it gets loud.
Yeah.
So
Probably. So which subcommittee is he on? I don't either. Is he on yours? Does he want to call in?
hey, Greg, can you unmute, please?
You can call on the cell, just.
Do you, for the subcommittees, Greg, do you want someone to call in so you can be on speakerphone?
Sure, how do I?
Hey,
Yes,
Greg.
how do we do that?
Greg, it's Steve Paige. I will call you on your cell and I'll just put the phone on.
Sounds good, Steve. Thanks.
Okay. So Steve, let us know if that doesn't work or if Billy kills your cell phone, and we'll track it
Okay.
on the backup.
We'll do.
There's one in here, but I don't know how that one works. That one's got too many buttons.
Not sure who else we're expecting.
That's it online. It's Lynn and Greg right now online.
You had a list of people who said they were coming.
I don't know.
Paige did.
I'm sorting people's names. Okay. Duncan? That's Duncan.
Yeah.
Ben. And Jim.
Amel's here, Adam's here, Brian's here. I found your list. Matt is here, Duncan's here, Steve's here. Sorry.
I was like, where did I look at? Alright. What?
I'm just a mom.
Right.
All right, well, we'll get back here at 10:30 so we can break out into our groups. Just for, if you use them in the subcommittees, we do have the drafts of the long-range plan, which is excellent. And if people didn't print out their own copies and want paper copies, the paper copies are there, and also our new compost regs. I saw Terry, you
I had a couple
printed
extra
out.
copies. Yep.
Yeah. So if we all remember what rooms we're in, can you help people get where they're going?
I'll walk them around.
All right.
You want-
So let's behave.
Yeah.
So we'll go ahead, this is the regular meeting, so the first thing that we should do is approve.
Wait, so you're ready to
So
start?
I'm ready, let the games begin.
Okay.
All right.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, so the first thing that we're gonna do is, approve the minutes, so if anybody has any comments on the minutes. Okay, so can I have a motion to approve the minutes, please? Okay, second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, great. I printed out my agenda, and I was so excited to join the source reduction study committee that I can't find my agenda. There it is. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is have the report outs from our subcommittee meetings, and I joined that one, and Steve and Frida and I were there. So Steve, if you want to
Sure.
do the report and speak up.
Sure. If folks can't hear me, please say something and I'll speak more talking, I did not take copious notes like I've done in the past, unfortunately.
Yeah, I should just say Greg Leahy was with us too.
Yeah,
by
Greg
phone.
Leahy was with
Yeah.
us. I think Greg is on the phone currently. We talked about, source reduction and what would need to be done to try to make that effective. And a lot of discussion came around education and communicating with various subcommittees and solid waste committees that are around the state, getting information out to them and what different mechanisms are in place to try to reduce waste at the source. We also talked about generator waste reduction, that being more difficult, and how folks could impact manufacturers and how they would reduce less waste. Talked about excess packaging. It's the, we're buying products that we'd like to see nice and neat, and we're buying toothpaste with a container that's in a box that really doesn't need to be in the box. But we also talked about other products like refrigerators that have large, heavy cardboard boxes around them to protect them. So there's a purpose for that packaging, but it will be difficult, I think, for the state of New Hampshire to really affect the change on these manufacturers that are coming in from all over the country, all over the world, with products that have, we think, is excess packaging. But so we talked a little about recycling that packaging that does come through. I think education's a key point that we're talking about. But source reduction continues to, needs to continue to be a focus going forward with education. Talked about preferred pricing and procurement, where we can affect that change, and it was been an effort at the state level to try to implement purchasing initiatives where products are getting purchased and where you can affect change as to what, not only from a packaging but also from a toxicity standpoint, something the state could do, and we could roll out maybe some model examples to municipalities to do the same kind of thing if they're so inclined. We talked about difficult to manage waste and things that could be recycled. We talked about textiles, mattresses, CBD, food waste. One of the thoughts that came up was looking to these organizations that manage these materials and what do they need to be successful. To reach out to them and find out, someone that takes textiles or mattresses, what do you need from municipalities or from the state to be successful in coming to New Hampshire and recycling mattresses versus just throwing them in a dumpster and having them in a landfill. I think that's something that could be done, and I think those are, one-page flyers with contacts with companies that do that type of work, that we can get out to various folks and try to implement that at the transfer stations or through various towns. Karen talked about planning tools that should be needed or are needed and could be generated at the state level. There were historically, and Mike Wim said on the phone, would know this, and others, historically there was a lot of information like that. I haven't seen it around here, but some of it maybe needs to be updated. There's an awful lot of that done historically, providing direction and communication to folks on various waste types and other initiatives that the state could implement. Talked about some things that the state of Massachusetts is doing, looking at large generators and converting materials. If there's an alternative outlet within a certain radius of that generator, like food waste. If you're generating more than a ton a week, there will be hospitals, education, institutions that generate a lot of the supermarkets, and you've got someone that is composting this or doing something else with it, and then within 50 miles of you, you need to go to that source until that facility is maxed out on capacity. I don't think that's that difficult to do, but something that we should probably take a look at going down. Talk about food donations, try to encourage that, but also some challenges that have been experienced with that. Source separation, discuss a little bit about this with C&D and things, not only in the homes, but at the transfer stations, and then the whole space issue. You start source separating everything, it overtakes your kitchen or the transfer station real estate that you may things that probably should, be source separated, so when folks receive it, they can do something with it and not have additional costs and manpower necessary to, separate these things. And at some point, it's, diminishing returns and it just gets disposed. Karen suggested, these subcommittees, we could have speakers come in. Don't necessarily have to do that in the full group. I think that's a good idea, but I also think if folks like SHA come in and talk about a topic, I think a lot of people at the table have an interest in that. But, that's something
Yeah, whatever
the groups
works.
could still be done. Others that were at, what did I miss? I mean, Karen, you wanted?
Well, I guess one of the things that we talked about was the passage of Senate Bill 380, and in that bill, the solid waste working group is supposed to be looking at solid waste improvement plans and municipalities having to comply with those plans in order to be able to bring trash to a landfill. And so we had samples from Vermont, and we talked a little bit about that. I think if you guys read my email, it's a little confusing whether that topic is source reduction or recycling. And so I sort of split it up between the two study committees. We have samples from Vermont. I think we can look at what they do. I think that, and I don't know if Graves is still here from the Municipal Association, but I think a lot of what's going to happen on the front lines is going to be with municipalities as we start to try to accomplish our diversion goals, and these SWIPs may be one way of doing it. But the other thing that we talked about was that, we can require our municipalities to have solid waste or waste reduction committees. We can require a SWIP. We can do a lot of those things, but a lot of the planning tools that they may need are going to have to come from and be generated by, at the state level. Because when I had the HB 617 recycling study committee, the municipalities came in and they said, we're in this global economy, we're really struggling, we need help, and we need help from the state. So I think the whole planning and education aspect will involve municipalities and businesses, but guidance has to come from the state, which of course gets us into the funding issue. And we talked a little bit about the tipping fee issue and how that can be a source of grant money for municipalities and that sort of thing. So that was one thing we talked about. The other thing I think I would just add is, our diversion goals at this point, the way they've been assembled, they're weight-based, but there's more to life and diversion than waste. I think we really have to also be focused on toxicity. And we hit on this sort of towards the end of the subcommittee meeting, but we thought that as a source reduction topic, we should be really looking at toxicity issues and PFAS, which of course is a very big issue in the state of New Hampshire and otherwise, and how it's everywhere. And we know that other states are, well, I've read a couple of states, they've passed a ban on PFAS and food, on things that are in direct contact with food, which when you think about it, that makes a lot of sense. So I think we won't, in source reduction, we shouldn't be talking just about weight, but we should be talking about toxicity. Frida, do you want to add anything?
No, not. I think you touched on the toxicity point, and Steve for the source reduction goals, and waiting for House Bill or Senate Bill, 380 to come through to start some planning. We find out to dovetail off what Steve had said, just the piece about reaching out to those companies that take the textiles and mattresses to see what they need to be successful and how to implement programs like theirs in the state. So
Yeah, Steve suggested that we sort of talk to mattress manufacturers, or how to sort of work with them to try to grease the skids a little bit to try to help that happen. And Steve was saying these bulky materials are what's really taking a lot of capacity, which point I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, furniture. And Yeah, and he said a lot of the furniture is coated with PFAS. So it's very complicated. And then we talked about EPR, which you guys also talked about. It makes your head explode at some level. Anything else, guys? Okay, your turn. Recycling and
Sure.
composting.
Our recycling and composting group, it's me, Adam, Brian, Ben, and Lynn. And we start off by talking about, what are our top priority materials that we want to focus on by weight so that we can reach our weight reduction disposal goals. And so we looked at the EPA's most recent data from 2018 and really identified some of the most important items as construction and demolition debris, food waste. After that, it's plastics, paper and paperboard, and a variety of other items. But then we really got into funding, right? Because a lot of our recommendations are going to be related to what can actually, where's the money going to come to implement a lot of the recommendations that we have. So we did spend some time talking about the need for some type of funding mechanism. So we talked about the surcharge bill and really the need to have the state legislature come up with some sort of funding mechanism so that the work of this committee can actually get implemented. We don't have any brilliant ideas on exactly how to make that happen, but we really think it's important that that continue to be a recommendation. After that, when we were trying to figure out, what are the top priority materials that we should focus on, we discussed that it's really important for the state of New Hampshire to have a waste characterization study, so that we're not just looking at national numbers, we're not looking at our neighboring states' numbers, but we actually know in New Hampshire what's being disposed of in New Hampshire. So that was a priority shorter term recommendation is for DES to oversee the execution of a waste characterization study. Again, it gets back to funding, but that's something that we thought was really important. And there is a possibility that the federal infrastructure funds may be available to fund something like this. Related to that, we thought it would be really helpful if the state is able to do a waste generation study, get a sense of actually what is the waste that we're generating within our state, so we can see how to be reducing that waste. We did talk about both for C&D and for food waste, recommendations for legislation that would require that if you have a certain amount of material that you're generating for the larger generators, and if you have proximity to a facility, then to be required to actually, recycle or compost those materials, rather than just going straight to being able to landfill them. Then we talked about whether it would make sense to talk about recommending a disposal ban for general common recyclables, like, paper, plastic, aluminum cans, that kind of thing. We didn't come up with a clear recommendation on that, but we did discuss the fact that, while Vermont has disposal bans coupled with recycling mandates, which means that if you're not allowed to dispose of glass in Vermont, it also means you can't send it over to New Hampshire and dispose of it in New Hampshire. However, other states like Massachusetts, they might have a disposal ban, but it doesn't stop people from that state sending their material here for disposal here, because they don't require that those materials be recycled. So our action item there was to review a New England state disposal and recycling mandate report that NERC put together, so that we could see specifically what is it that other states are banning that is still allowed to be disposed of here, and then do we need to think about potentially recommending disposal bans so that we're not just accepting waste that everyone else is banning from their own landfills. We talked about regionalization and how we could make it easier for communities to work together, since we have so many small communities. And so we think it would be really helpful if perhaps DES is able to provide education around exactly what does it take for municipalities to partner together, whether it's a solid waste district or whether it's a more informal just partnership, so that one community can take some of their material to another community. What does the permitting look like to make that happen? Examples of communities who've done this successfully. Just sort of better education for communities on how to implement that type of partnership, and making sure that you're including local decision makers, so not just educating solid waste operators, but also you need to have, town administrators, select board members who understand this process as well and can have buy-in. We talked about whether the group should recommend pursuing a bottle redemption bill again. And we talked specifically about the financial ramifications that could have on municipalities, on MRFs. And so an action out of that was that Lynn had pointed out that NERC's bottle bill committee had recently had a presentation by an organization called Reloop that specifically talked about the financial ramifications. And so I'm going to grab that PowerPoint and send it around for people to take a look at for our next committee meeting. We talked about pay-as-you-throw, variable rate pricing for solid waste, and how it really can be a very effective waste reduction technique. And so we recommend that more education is done on this note, coming out of DES partnering with others to educate communities about how you can implement pay-as-you-throw to help reduce waste in your community. Also, apparently DES used to have a staff member who really had the capacity to provide technical assistance to help communities actually implement pay-as-you-throw, so that would be great if that can happen, with funding in the future. And then we also talked about state procurement policies and basically recommending that if there are ways that state agencies can be encouraged, incentivized to purchase recycled content material, that would certainly help drive demand for, recycling in New Hampshire. So that was something that did not involve DES. And then one of the last ones we talked about, and this might fall more under the Waste Reduction Committee, but I remember years ago, New Hampshire lagged behind some of its neighboring states in terms of the ability for schools to save packaged food and then re-offer them at a later time to students. And there was some uncertainty as to whether that's been improved since I've last been involved with it. And then Brian actually moderated a workshop at NRRA's recent recycling conference with Chris Vealing from the EPA, and so he's going to reach out and see if she has any further updates for us on that piece. And then lastly, we were talking about how big generators like schools and hospitals, Lancaster as the example of receiving, lots of chairs to be thrown away because, school needs new chairs and they just throw them all away. Is there a way that we can incentivize reuse? And so I don't know if perhaps that falls under the, reduction committee, but is there a way we could be helping those larger generators make it easier for them to reuse items instead of just throwing them away? Anything else, guys? We covered a lot.
Yeah, you did a lot. So the regionalization thing, from a transportation standpoint, that could also be really helpful.
Yeah, there's a whole host of incentives to help communities work together. How can we more effectively encourage that?
To the point about states not allowing things to be disposed and having it come to New Hampshire. Massachusetts, for example, that's not allowed. If you're caught transferring unprocessed C&D from Massachusetts to New Hampshire, you'll get fined. Champion City is a good example. A couple of years ago, they were railing unprocessed C&D out to Ohio. Got hit with a pretty significant fine. We find C&D coming in trailers from out of state. We do see it bleeding in to the MSW. We call them and shut them off if they don't change it. So there's mechanisms in place to do that.
Got it. With a ban that doesn't also require recycling.
Right.
Yeah, it probably
It's
depends on the state law.
Yeah, it's holding that generator or transfer facility accountable. It's their responsibility to do it.
Well, and a lot of those things that can be part of these toolkits that we can start to put together for municipalities. I think a lot of what we're talking about, there has to be some help and some support and guidance for the communities to be able to help us achieve our diversion goals, because they're really on the front lines of it.
Well, on that note, I'll just add that the Northeast Resource Recovery Association, we currently are working on a USDA grant but our hopefully we'll find out this summer if we get the next grant that we applied for, and that grant actually would incorporate, it was specifically focused on creating very easy to understand, accessible toolkits for municipalities on certain, you know, key topics. And so food waste and composting was going to be one, probably pay as you throw. So that could be a way that we could potentially even, you know, start some of this work, short of DES, you know, getting more funding and getting more staffing. We could at least partner with DES and other organizations to pull together these resources.
Well, and I think it was in the thing that you headed up at the NRA conference, the Rhode Island Recycling Program. They worked really closely with schools, so, you know, developing toolkits for schools and they did like waste audits, right? And they figured out that 70% of what was coming out of schools was from the school cafeterias, and it was mostly food waste. And the heaviest part of it was elementary schools, because they just lay out all the food on the kids' trays, and it's like at the end. So, yeah. Do a lot of businesses hire waste consultants to help them sort of get a grip on their waste streams?
Only the really large manufacturers like General Motors, Ford, these massive plants where they're producing a lot of waste, and they've got the resources to bring somebody in. But if you get Joe's, you know, pizza shop,
then they don't.
you know, but, you know, to that point, sales folks from a variety of companies will say, look, here's a container, and it's a balancing act. Here's a container for recyclables, here's one for disposal. There's a, you know, rental fee for those containers, and there's a cost for disposal. You can avoid that disposal cost if you put more material into recycling. And that's done at the sales level, and I think everyone does that, I'm assuming. But to really get into the production, the generation at a high level, or not at a high level, but, you know, granular, those are generally larger waste generators.
Well, didn't you say Waste Management just invested in, was it ESG?
Yeah. Yeah. Millions of dollars is happening right now to try to move the needle, if you will, because we know the sustainability and governance and environmental protection are key, and everyone's looking at it. So what are we doing now? What we're looking at?
Yeah, and we talked a lot about this too, about how there's a lot of economic drivers, but there also has to be like a desire to do the right thing with all these recyclables and PFAS and everything else, and it, you know, that's why funding becomes important. So, anyway, anybody else?
For the peanut gallery, ESG, what does that stand for?
Environmental sustainability and governance criteria of a corporation.
Thank you.
How important are those things in the way you run your business versus just the P&L? That's the bottom line.
Okay.
So this is advanced technologies.
Yeah, so we had a nice group, Representative Pearl and Duncan, Matt, and myself, Jameli. A lot of overlap as I hear the groups talking, absolutely. So just to kind of couch this a little bit, first we identify that we fall into the management plan draft, the goal 4, clearly, that's where we are. And when you do search on innovative alternative, it's very easy to come away with the conclusion, and I put it in my notes that I sent to Mike, many parts of the world are way ahead of us. And that's easy to say, but again, our group is kind of neat in that we're really boots on the ground. I'm an engineer. When you dig into it, when you dig into that statement, it's usually the country is much smaller. The country has laws and tax structures that support it. The country has been at it for, in the case of Europe, millennia. And so I don't think we want to use that as a way of flogging ourselves, was a comment. In Australia and in New Zealand, it's punishable by fines and criminal penalties. So none of them are ever going to fit New Hampshire, I don't think. So the innovation we started talking about, which I think may get some legs, may not, is first, not all materials recovery facilities are created equal. They're all over the map when you design them. for a living. And there are many in the larger parts of our country and in the larger parts of the world that are moving further and further away from the human factor. And the reason for that is, I think education is so vital. When you run an MRF, I think you have the great name for it, the overzealous recycler is your worst enemy, because they throw stuff in bins and glass light bulbs, right? So actually we are moving away in some industries, and I don't mean to insult anyone, education's still vital, but making them more foolproof, quite honestly. The other thing we flagged, and I think everybody in our group agreed, there's a real infrastructure issue, particularly on the tail end, right? You pull out wood, you pull out whatever, what do I do with it, right? And Matt had a great example. The only two places that he can send his wood are now down for reasons beyond control, right? So there's an infrastructure issue on once we separate it all. But I think what started to bubble up that could be a really interesting fit for New Hampshire, and we use Pease Tradeport as an example, the concept eventually of a regenesis campus. They have them in Europe. And what that really means is we have the advanced recycling, separation technologists, but right there on that same campus, we have users of the material. You know, taking the plastic all the way back to a yarn and then selling it for socks, for example. That's real popular in the ocean plastic game now. So we threw that out as a possible thing to think about, because it would be such an ideal fit for New Hampshire, right? We can start talking about business development and bringing in high-paying jobs and bringing in industries as our manufacturing has sort of left us, right? So we threw that out there. Education is important, and reminding the public that the waste doesn't stop. So shooting holes in every option is fine, but at the end of the day, I have 1,000 tons per day to deal with, so waste never stops. We talked about C&D and food as moving the needle the most right now, and we talked about anaerobic digestion. The other thing that needs to be brought up when we talk composting, anaerobic digestion, I mentioned this last time, and even these modern commingled MRFs, odor shuts a lot of them down, or the cost to control odor economically shuts them down, because the nature of these materials, when you have putrescible food waste, is humans can smell it for miles, and many humans don't want to smell it anymore, right? We've moved away from a farming mentality to, jokingly in the New Jersey area, we call it double income, no kids. They don't want to smell it. And so most of the advanced recycling, composting put in Connecticut is now shut down due to odor. So anyway, just throwing that out. And that's really all we had. And again, thanks for listening, and I sent it over to Mike, and good talk.
So around the State House, we recently had a bill that used the term advanced recycling that had to do with plastics specifically.
Right.
But you're not using it in that context, right?
Can be. I mean, that's the
it's
other thing, right?
broader.
Lingo is a tough one, but I think when most people talk about advanced recycling, they're talking about advanced separation, and they show photos of robots. But separating 1 through 7, especially if we have a companion that takes it all the way back to the monomer, right? Plastic number 1 through plastic number 7, right? Bring it all the way back to the monomer, and then you can make thread out of it again or whatever. Most people, I think, realize about most of our thread is from petrochemicals, right? So, but we weren't using it in that context specifically for plastic, that's right. And I think there's still a feeling in the industry nationwide that plastics aren't going to move the needle anywhere near as much as food and C&D will. So,
As far as waste.
does that help?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I actually was going to ask your subcommittee to just look at the advanced recycling bill. I mean, I think you guys worked really hard on it, but it's very technically challenging, and so I was just going to turn the bill that was passed over to your committee to just take a look at a little bit more.
Sure, be thrilled to. I mean, we've got waste energy and Duncan, and sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Sure, I mean, I guess the other thing I should have said is whatever the solution's gonna be, it's gonna have all the pieces, right? It's gonna have to because of the shifting market forces, so hopefully minimized, but I think we're always gonna have landfills, we're always gonna have waste energy in some form. I think we'll always have some form of landfill biogas generation and recovery. Maybe RDF will return, maybe it won't, that's a tough one. You know,
What's
making the
RDF?
fuel, taking in pelletizing refuse-derived fuel and then selling that pellet for a fuel source that was hot briefly and then sort of fell out of favor with the market. I think it's going to have to all be on the table because again, the front end and the tail end are so variable. You know, sadly we see many a time everything got set aside and bailed and then China sword or whatever the next thing is, PFAS. So where does it wind up in the landfill? Because again, it's still coming in at 1,000 tons per day or something. Yeah, I think it's all got to be on the table. That's my opinion. Please jump in, colleagues, group mates.
Good. Yeah.
I mean, I went to the NRRA conference and there were several speakers there, and I just really came away from the conversation thinking that we're all wrestling so hard with what to do with the end product of everything that we're consuming, and that there should be responsibility on the front end of the people that are producing it to do a better job. And I mean, we talked about this a lot in our subcommittee. It's hard to affect that at the state level. In many ways, that has to come from the federal government, and so we were thinking as part of the plan, we should at least have something in there that DES or will continue to try to work with the feds to do more to help us do a better job with our solid waste issues here. So, okay, well, I guess that is it. The only other thing I wanted to add is that, again, I mean, we don't have a landfill subcommittee per se, but I think we're really going to have to get down to it and talk about landfill issues as part of our work here, the capacity issue, the public benefit clause, all of those sorts of things. So I just want to reassure, or maybe just myself, that we're not going to forget that topic. We really have to dig in on that. And I know that the DES has been working really hard to get the long-range plan done, but there's also a biennial report out there that's going to be finalized, Mike, right, to talk about all the things you talk about in the biennial report. I mean, could you just summarize what you do in the biennial report, since we even have NPR on here?
Okay, so the biennial report was something that I was hoping we might have around now, but because of the draft outline for the solid waste management plan, it was kind of a competing priority, so we focused on generating a draft outline of the solid waste management plan. We are going to be focusing now on developing an update for the biennial report. That report is essentially a check-in on achievement of the waste reduction goals that we have in statute. So it's a way for the department to basically assess if we're achieving those goals or not. It's also supposed to highlight some of the goings-on in the industry and in the waste management world in New Hampshire over the last couple of years, trends, developments from, in terms of summarizing legislation that's been passed. It also is supposed to provide information on disposal capacity, and that's one of the things that held us up initially. Was we didn't have updated disposal capacity information until the Mount Carberry landfill expansion was approved. Now that that has been approved, we can use the information that was used for the determination for Mount Carberry as in terms of disposal capacity. We can now update that, so that'll be coming out hopefully soon. I keep saying that, I know, but we do intend to be putting that out.
Well, I just think it's a really vital document for us and for our work in putting together the long-range plan, so I know now you have Paige by your side, so that'll be great, so thank you. Yeah, folks, if you haven't met Paige, this is Paige Wilson. If you wanna do the introduction, go ahead.
Okay, so.
But she hasn't really met the group, sorry.
So Paige hasn't officially been present for a solid waste working group meeting yet. This is her first actual, as a DES staff member. So Paige came to us from the Lakes Region Planning Commission. She's been with DES now for about a little over a month, I think, a couple weeks, over a month. I don't know, Paige, if you just want to introduce yourself a little bit.
I'm the new waste reduction and diversion planner for the Solid Waste Management Bureau. So I've been heavily working on the robust draft outline for the state plan update. I had experience with solid waste planning at the Lakes Region Planning Commission before. I was there for almost 4 years, working under different grants and doing grant funding and grant writing for funding for helping municipalities with developing signage, trying to start some backyard composting education programs, providing general technical assistance, and just trying to help them educate their residents. So that was pretty much a lot of my job, was outreach and education there. So that's now translating to DES and hopefully filling more of that role here for the Bureau.
Well, welcome. I mean, I think I sit here and a lot of us sit here saying what municipalities need and what would be helpful for them. We have Nate here from the Municipal Association and you. I mean, please share with us things that we should be talking about or want to make sure to include as we go through the process, because they really will have to partner up to help us achieve the goals that we want to achieve. So anyway, okay, well, welcome. And with that, Steve Zemba is here. Hi, Steve. And you're going to tell us about the terrible, wonderful world of PFAS. Thank you for coming. So,
glad to be here, and I apologize for the mask, but I woke up feeling like crud today. I did do my COVID test. It's not COVID.
Okay.
Oh, good. But it is something else, so I'm trying to keep it to myself.
All right. Do you want to just sort of introduce yourself? That'd be
Yes,
great.
I can do that. I'm a consultant with Sanborn. I think most people in the room know who Sanborn is. It's a local consulting company, but we operate in 4 or 5 states. I'm in the Burlington, Vermont office, and previous to that, I was a mechanical engineer back in my youth. Got doing health risk assessment, so chemicals in the environment, for a lot of years. A small company called Cambridge Environmental in Massachusetts, and found my way to Sanborn. The past few years, I've been looking at PFAS issues of all sorts. Good way for a consulting company to make money, but also an interesting thing to look at in terms of, it's not too often we add new chemicals to our list and repertoire, and it's been interesting to see how that all is working and is going on. So what I'm going to talk about today will be PFAS issues facing landfills, and I'll touch on a number of topics, and we'll see where it gets to. Please feel free to interrupt me at any point, and we'll go from there. The first slide, maybe. As an outline, I'm going to kind of make a point, and this is pretty obvious to everybody. You guys all know what PFAS are, or have a good sense of it?
No.
I mean, why don't you just take it from the top? And if you could speak
Okay.
up, I'm sorry, a little louder.
You know,
we
I'm gonna-
have like the air thing going on here. So.
Are you guys good here? Be uncomfortable if I take the mask off?
Yeah. Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
It'll make life easier.
All right. Yeah, it's funny, the air, we like the ventilation, but.
Okay. No, I can understand that. At any rate, you can see a couple of molecules up there from your high school chemistry class back in the day of what PFAS are. If you think of the chemicals in gasoline, like alkanes, octane, things like that, they're carbon chains, hydrogens attached to them. If you take the hydrogens off of those and put fluorines on them, you suddenly have perfluoroalkyl substances, and those are kind of inert chemicals. And to make them useful, they have an end on them, Those are carboxylic acids and sulfonic acids. So these act as acids, strong acids in solution, but also as surfactants, because that tail, that carbon-fluorine tail, is very stable, can't degrade it, but it also doesn't like water and it doesn't like fats, so it sticks its little rear end out in the water, just like a surfactant. Good enough?
So it makes it slippery.
So it makes it
It can make it slippery, yeah, among other things. But because of that, those chemicals have such wonderful properties. Waterproofing, as an example, and they get used in hundreds of Teflon and other. Teflon's a polymerized form, but there's an impurity associated with some of these chemicals in it. They just have these wonderful properties that have gotten used in hundreds to thousands, probably, of consumer products. We're going to talk about that ubiquity, and not only in waste themselves, but also in the environment at this point in time. PFAS are really everywhere. And I want to point out that landfills do receive PFAS from many sources. And what I want to leave you guys with is that PFAS, well, a lot of it probably stays in the landfill. Some comes out right now in leachate, at least. But from my perspective, from an environmental perspective, landfills are actually good for PFAS in the sense that they are a storage or a sequestration mechanism for a lot of PFAS. So I think that's a good thing ultimately. I think we are going to have to go to leachate treatment though, because one of the things it does is landfills will concentrate waste together, and some PFAS will come out in the leachate. We know that from a lot of data. I'll show you some of that data. So if we take care of that problem and maybe think about landfill gas a little bit, landfills can kind of be the end-all be-all for PFAS potentially, large amounts of it. And it's not just because I work for these guys, it's because it's kind of the way I kind of see this problem at this point. So I kind of see that they could be an effective way to manage PFAS, if you think of it in that manner. So next slide. Some of the many sources of PFAS, a lot of them do come in consumer products, and you guys can read the list, but they are in pretty much many things that we've created, but also other types of waste, not only consumer products, that landfills will accept, things like sludges. Landfills will typically accept wastewater treatment plant sludges, as an example. Discarded AFFF. I don't know if landfills are still taking that, or they didn't think so. Aqueous film-forming foam, which has very high levels of PFAS in it. It's the contamination that started PFAS, was AFFF. Soils, all soils, whether they're contaminated with anything, are probably going to have some PFAS in them these days, just due to long-range deposition and transport. And lots of other sources that you can think of. And we're learning more about those as we go. And I'll show you a little bit of mass balance info on one particular landfill. It'll give you some sense of that. So next slide. So these are courtesy of Steve Podgy, and they're kind of making the point that I just did, that PFAS is everywhere. The microwave popcorn bag's a very interesting one, because you may remember, if you're old enough, between the 1995 and 2000-ish time frame, there's a sudden scare about chemicals in microwave popcorn. That was back in the year 2000-ish. Those are PFAS in the packaging that was getting into the popcorn. And that's true, you mentioned food waste and food packaging and being next to PFAS next to food. That's still going on to some extent, but they had it big time in microwave popcorn bags, which is what that was all about. Dust in daycare centers because of carpeting. All of these carpets, I don't know if this one's covered or coated in PFAS or not, but generate dust from that, you're going to find PFAS. I haven't looked into the makeup yet, but I don't usually look into it because I don't think about it. But it wouldn't surprise me if some of the shiny, glossy stuff that in makeups was to some extent related to PFAS. All this stuff, of course, is going to end up in compost, landfills, etc. So next slide. The food packaging is interesting. These are huge numbers. We usually talk about PFAS in the part per trillion range, part per trillion being an unfathomable number. It's like 1 second in 31,000 years is, I think, the equivalent of 1 part per trillion. And but these are parts per billion, and they're in the hundreds of thousands of parts per billion. It's because these items are coated in PFAS, coated paper, essentially. It's the reason that the cheese does not stick to the paper when you unwrap your hamburger is because there's PFAS coatings in there. these are interesting measurements because they're total fluorine measurements, and kind of a screening technique for looking at PFAS. But you can be pretty sure that there are PFAS compounds. You just don't know which ones at this point because the use and the types of the PFAS compounds have changed over time, essentially. But very high concentrations in food, wrappers. That's supposed to go away. I think manufacturers have volunteered to take PFAS out of food packaging, right?
Yeah, let me just interject on that one. McDonald's said they were going to stop coating their wrappers with this material. They didn't do that. There's a lawsuit against McDonald's because they're not doing what they said they were going to do. There's interesting levels up there. The leachate levels generally are in the 10 to 20 part per billion range, compared to 20 to 300,000 in food that we're eating, or wrappers around food. So it's pretty scary to think those concentrations are out there in everyday products. And the leachate's at 20 to 30 compared to that.
And if you think about the volume you take of this sort of stuff relative to other waste, this could be the major source of PFAS in your leachate right now. Because those wrappers decay pretty quickly in a landfill and will loose up that PFAS. So one of your colleagues, Terry Johnson, has been taking data and looking at PFAS concentrations over time. And you see changes because we stopped using some PFAS, so PFOA and PFOS are slowly going down in the leachate. Whereas other things are still going up because those compounds are still used in commerce. In a few years, hopefully, you get it out of packaging completely and we can watch the leachate levels slowly come down again.
Is there an alternative material that you're using, or it's just paper now?
What do you mean alternative to these?
The PFAS, yeah, using an alternative.
Sure there are, but they're just not as effective. It gets back to the tube of toothpaste in a box. It's nice and neat and it works great, so that's what we do. This product works great, it really does. If you put Rain-X on your windshield, right, that works great. Car washes, they don't beat up and have spots on your cars because it's coated in PFAS when you drive through that section.
There will be alternatives, but they won't work as well.
Yeah.
We'll see where that goes.
What'll be the next thing?
You just won't get all these cheese on your
Yeah.
burger anymore.
So when they started using these, did they look at the toxicity issue?
Depends on who you believe. They have to do a certain number of studies. A lot of times those studies kind of go into files and don't see the light of day. But have you seen the movie Dark Waters? It's about PFAS and it's about an attorney in Ohio named Rob Lalonde who worked for the Taft law firm. And he started getting information requests to DuPont and to 3M, DuPont specifically because it was Parker's work, and started seeing some of the information on the toxicity studies. And a large amount of any chemicals would be harmful to you. The real question that those guys are trying to face was with a small amount of the chemicals would be harmful to you. And it turns out if you have, say, 10 parts per trillion in your drinking water, that it will show up in your blood at a higher level because it bioaccumulates. A couple of PFAS do. And so every 10 parts per trillion is about another part per billion in your blood. We all have PFAS in our blood still. PFOA, PFOS. Those levels have been coming down, but only God really knows how toxic PFAS are. Any toxicologist that tries to tell you that they do, they're making a lot of assumptions. We're working kind of without a net, and I think the reason we're being very careful is because we just don't know. If you think you can have this chemical in your body and not harm you, you can get used to the idea that maybe PFAS aren't very toxic. And there are probably 1,000 chemicals in your body we can measure. So it isn't PFAS alone. But the studies, are not really that good. They do studies in rats and mice, and those are really bad models for people because rats and mice only hold on to these compounds for a few days, whereas we hold on to some of them for years. So it's really hard to gauge the toxicity, and regulators are being very, very careful with it.
I think New Hampshire's taken a pretty good approach, to be honest. They're doing health effect studies, right, thanks to Shaheen and others. I think we've got to be careful because my whole career we've had one chemical after another, right? So the chemistry is way out ahead. like you said, a part per trillion's pretty ridiculous, right? It's a eye drop in 20 Olympic swimming pools. The health effects never catch up. And I think we've got to be a little careful about scaring and panicking the public from chemical to chemical, right? In our day, it was PCBs, it was DDT, right? Because we have really solid evidence that blood levels were really high at one time, but we don't have correlation to an exponential increase in cancer or birth defect. I'm not trying to be devil's advocate. I'm being the university type here that we can't run around saying our hair's on fire every time we can measure a part per trillion of something, right? So I just want to be a little careful, right? The reason the federal government is dragging their feet is partly political, but partly the 70 PPT hasn't been fully knocked out yet, right? The states have taken over and had a race to the bottom, right? 12, 6, 4, 2. But a lot of that's been politically driven, not technically driven, right? Is that a fair comment?
Well, some of it.
Yeah, I just want to be careful, especially in the engineer and STEM community. We don't want to run around with our hair on fire, right? We're not Mark Ruffalo. Okay, I'm being a devil's advocate here. I'm just going to push back a little bit. I'm pushing back because we've got to be really careful because.
To push back.
Yeah.
I wish our risk communications would tell people that.
Yeah.
That, yeah, on the one hand, we're being very careful. On the other hand, we don't really have solid evidence.
No, we
that
don't.
chemicals
No,
cause
we don't.
any problems at all.
That's right. We just don't have evidence.
We're working without a net. But we do know, one thing we do know is they will bioconcentrate in your blood.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of what I get back to as an engineer.
Yeah.
And
Oh yeah, the other shock for most people is PFAS is not banned. We sold $2.5 billion worth of PFAS in 2021, right? So that's the alternative right now, right? We moved from 8-chain to 3-chain.
Yep.
And we put the 3-chain on our paper now, so for our pizza, right? I just wanted to push back a little bit because it's really scary when we start spending nationwide $150 billion on something we're not sure is the health effect.
if you want a further opinion on that, if we spend another $40 million doing better toxicity studies,
Yeah.
we know a lot more.
Yeah, you're
But
right.
instead,
You're absolutely right.
What we do is we argue about these toxicity studies have been done and how relevant they are, the animal studies to
Yeah.
people. The people studies, the epidemiological studies, where they're looking for correlations between health effects in the population and higher PFAS levels, which is what's going on at Pease and other places.
Right.
Those are fraught with methodological problems too. They don't give you a clean signal.
Yeah.
And we'll never know. That's why I'm saying only God really knows how toxic PFAS are.
Sorry to interrupt. Thanks for putting up with the New
Can I
Yorker.
just ask a question to what you had just said? So you had said we've gone from 8-chain to 3-chain. Can you
Yes.
go 8-chain to 3-chain for dummies? Because I don't know what you meant by that.
The carbons, yeah. So Gen X is the newest
Go up four
PFAS.
slides.
Go back.
Go back up.
Yep.
Just to the picture on the
Yep,
front. I
that's
can show you the difference between a short chain and a long chain. It's called. PFBS has 4 carbons on it. There's little black dots there. And then PFO8 has 8. That's a long chain compound. As an example.
Yeah. So
But
we banned the 2 8s. Those are the only 2 that are truly banned.
Except they're not banned in China, so they
Exactly.
Yes,
So I just worry when we panic, folks, because people do panic in the communities we work with. You know, they really do.
And I think it would be great to put balanced pieces out there on the risk communications, and
Agreed.
not just why
It's hard
they
to
think they're
do.
toxic, but arguments for why they might not be toxic.
Yeah.
You shouldn't scare people unnecessarily. Vermont is going through a PCB and indoor air problem right now in schools. You guys might have heard about that. PCBs and talking compound from the 1960s and 1970s. The stuff lasted forever, but it's off-gassing slowly in the schools. Has been for the past 50 years, by the way. But we're now worried about it from a toxicological perspective, and we might be talking about no risk at all or very, very, very low risk. But that's kind of, when you tell it to people, and some people get really, really scared.
Right.
And people say, I went through those schools, I don't have 3 heads, I must be okay. So it's tough. I think what we can say is there's no smoking gun to these chemicals causing widespread health effects. I think we would see that if it existed. It's the subtle health effects that we're looking at. Currently, people are looking at things like immunological system development and whether PFAS can basically impair your immunological system when you're a kid. Now, many other things can do that too, but if PFAS could do that, then maybe you might be more susceptible to diseases when you get older. And you can't measure that easily. So it's, I just like to say we're being careful.
Well, I'm not excited about eating them, I'll tell you that.
No, nobody is, that's for sure.
What?
Nobody's
No.
saying we should do that.
But what was it that Vermont just passed a law that they can't be in any paper or any product that touches food directly? Was that?
I don't know that law.
I may be wrong. I thought that maybe it was made.
I'd really like to see how they're going to enforce it. Because a lot of your food gets packaged in states outside of, it's going to be a tough one to enforce. But in theory, that's going to happen anyways because manufacturers have agreed, I think in 2.5 or 3 years, to take PFAS out of food packaging. It should happen anyways. Vermont's probably just jumping the gun. Okay, back to the next slide. I knew we'd get to the fourth slide eventually. Soil amendments. I think you're talking about compost products here that are often made from sewage sludges and things of that sort. All have, these are part per billion, sometimes several part per billion levels in compost. Maine is having a real problem with this right now. They land apply a lot of their sewage sludge on farm fields, and one farm in particular had really bad problems with the food, or the PFAS getting into milk. And this is a question, and this is not a new question for sewage sludge. Sewage sludge has higher levels of metals in it too. EPA went through a very careful risk assessment back in the day to determine whether it was safe to do that. They're probably engaged in that again, but PFAS makes it harder because it's hard to predict the environmental transport properties of PFAS. It doesn't follow our standard models, and eventually, that's going to be one of the questions, and the question ultimately becomes, if you're putting it on farm fields, is it getting into the crops, and then is it also getting into the groundwater and leaching out? But for that reason, a lot of wastewater treatment plants are starting to think about alternatives to their sludges. And from an environmental perspective, we took away incineration because it's too costly to build a sewage sludge incinerator. We're going to take away land application, and one of the things that will be left will be landfills. Will landfills accept those? It's an interesting question. And we don't have too many options. I mean, some novel technologies, we're talking about pyrolysis is out there now, thinking about for sewage sludge as a possibility, but we don't have an off-the-shelf answer to this one yet. So those are soil amendments, and I want to get it to, next slide, environmental media. These are data from DES. You can download them on OneStop. These are publicly available data. But New Hampshire DES put out a request. I don't know how strong the arms are twisted on this, but a request for facilities to sample the groundwater for PFAS. Facilities that already had groundwater monitoring wells, like landfills, hazardous waste disposal sites. And when they looked for PFAS in groundwater, a lot of the work heretofore had been done in drinking water, but this is just groundwater downgrading of a site or a type of site, things like solid waste facilities. You found PFAS in most of those cases. And these compounds really are kind of ubiquitous. So you can see the frequency in drinking water supplies, public water supplies. The most commonly detected one is PFOA, the 8-carbon carboxylic acid. But other ones are detected quite frequently too. Those are the 4 regulated compounds in New Hampshire at this point, to the 60 to 80% frequency. So, and these are not sites where you'd expect to find PFAS. It wasn't a PFAS disposal site. I mean, landfills do accept PFAS, that's understandable, but a lot of the facilities in that database are going to be those old municipal landfills that we affectionately like to call dumps at some point because they weren't lined. So yeah, they're going to affect groundwater, but so are other sites because these compounds are just used in so many places. So they're out there in groundwater. Next slide. They are also out there in soil. We were part of a University of Vermont study that went and collected samples from town greens, state parks, places you have no reason to suspect you find PFAS. And we found PFAS in the soil in every single sample, which has a lot of implications if you're doing site work, because if you go out and you just take a background sample, you're going to find low levels of PFAS in it. We think this is coming from all of the emissions over 50 years across the country. Some of it goes up into the air, some of it comes down. Acid rain is a good example of that type of thing, where it was the power plants in the Midwest that were causing acid rain in New Hampshire. So how about the emissions of all of these compounds across the eastern North America, getting up into the air, slowly depositing? And these are relatively low levels, low part per billion levels in soil. The point is, it's out there in soil pretty much everywhere. Most common compounds are, again, the 8-carbon PFOA and PFOS, at about 1 part per billion if you add up parts per trillion divided by 1,000. About 1 part per billion total for those two chemicals on average. And as the analytical detection limits get better on methods, we're going to detect them even more frequently, right? Because we're going to have detection limits to get down there. So that's the idea that they're out there in soils. I think New Hampshire, is doing a study through USGS potentially. Yeah. Do you guys know that? But probably we'll get very similar information, I guess.
So in waste to energy plants, what happens to the PFAS? Are you scrubbing for,
Oh, that's a really good question.
looking at Matt.
I'm looking at Steve.
Well, there was going to be a study of it at a Covanta facility in New Jersey. Kind of got squashed for political reasons again. Hesitating, facilities are hesitant to go take data. Because if you go take data, you suddenly have data. I think there was some data collected in Florida in some ash that they found PFAS in some ash samples, which would indicate that of all the PFAS that goes into a waste energy plant, probably not all of it's destroyed. But we just don't know what fraction of it's destroyed, because you can detect this at such tiny, tiny levels. It may well be that they're destroying 99 or more percent of it. But yeah, those are going to be continuing sources to the environment. And it's also possible that landfills are releasing a little bit of PFAS in the environment too. I'll talk about that by the time we get down on the air side, that is.
So just as a matter of chemistry, is part of the reason that these things live so long is they're so inert, which is why they're slippery, but then when they get into the environment, they just don't degrade in particular, they just hang out.
These particular ones, yes. They're called the forever chemicals for just that reason. And that was a manufacturing benefit, because they were very stable.
Yeah.
One place they get used, by the way, is at chromium plating facilities in the chrome baths. The chrome baths are at high temperature, and a chrome plating bath will create bubbles, and the bubbles will break the aerosols, and workers get exposed to hexadental chromium. You put these chemicals in the bath, you decrease the surface tension of that bath, you decrease the bubbles, you decrease the worker exposure to hexchrome. So for many, many years, these chemicals have been used just that way. But guess what? They're there because they're very stable. They'll hold up in the bath, whereas other chemicals won't. They do the same thing. So high stability. And you hit the nail on the head too. The incineration, there's a lot of debate as to how effectively they can be destroyed by incineration. But from an engineering perspective, what residence times and temperatures do you need to destroy PFAS? They can be destroyed. Just a question of how hard you have to work at it. So surface water, this is a Colorado survey. I suspect New Hampshire's going to be coming out with, already has some data, I just haven't put it together. The nice thing about the Colorado data set, it's all in one report, and you can quickly plot it up. But once again, they went out and sampled in surface water and found PFAS in every single surface water sample. Some PFAS. The chemicals are out there. So that is the point on that one. I think I'm going to turn to waste.
Next slide.
Next slide, yes, thanks.
Yeah.
So when I think about a landfill, it's a well-designed landfill, has a double liner on it, has a liner on the top. They're kind of like reaction chambers. And that's why you produce landfill gas and waste decay, or some waste decay in landfills. But you can also think for this from a PFAS perspective, that all those products we talked about are ways that PFAS get into landfills. And then the questions are, how could PFAS get out of a landfill? Well, the obvious one is the leachate. We have measurements there to show that. There also might be different types of leachate you can think about, whether it's the condensate or the stuff that percolates down through the waste. Condensate you get out of the gas. And the landfill gas itself is going to be a source of PFAS, and you guys probably know about the Coakley landfill, PFAS issues. That was a case of stormwater causing a problem, and it was when the landfill was completely finished, there's a cap on top, well, they put short paper fiber sludge in the artificial soil, and it's leaching out. So water's not even getting into the landfill, it's just running across the landfill. And that manufactured soil lift result and releasing some PFAS. So the source is out, but can be looked at that way. But what we tried to do in a couple of cases is do some mass balances. How much is coming in versus how much is going out. And right now we can do that through the leachate and some of the waste in. We'll talk about that in a second. I think the next slide might be my PFAS cycle. Nope. Oh, this is our study in Vermont where Vermont DEC required the Coventry landfill, USVT, to do a PFAS study. So figure out where PFAS is coming in the waste. And what we proposed back to them was we're going to sample all the easy to do waste. Things like all of the sludges that came in. We could do mattress covers, we could do carpeting. There's no standard method for doing this, by the way. We kind of had to invent our own method where we cut stuff up, put it in little jars, and leached it out. But kind of what you can see here is what you might expect, bulky items like mattress covers had a lot of PFAS. And these are in units of parts per billion. If I put these in the part per trillion range, that would be 2 million parts per trillion. So a lot of PFAS. If you have it, it's there, right? You're going to see a lot of it in the code. And true of textiles and carpeting, but also every sludge that we tested coming from wastewater treatment plants and some industries had PFAS in them at lower levels, but still that's in the 100 part per billion range, which is actually relatively high for PFAS. And C&D waste, partly carpeting, but not so much in C&D waste other than carpeting, but other sources also had PFAS. So what we tried to do for this landfill was take these concentrations. Don't get scared by concentrations, but it's the concentration times how much of something you take in that tells you how much mass, the mass flux. So we tried to come up with those mass fluxes and do a mass balance on this landfill based on the waste that we sampled. Things that we didn't sample, food packaging, regular old household waste. You guys are talking about doing a waste characterization study. Think about doing a PFAS characterization study on top of it. Because you're going to sort it out into piles. So you're going to have all, certain type of paper and things of that sort. It would be very interesting to take some PFAS samples so you can do a better job on this mass balance, because those are the wastes you couldn't do in Vermont, at least in the time frame we had. So with the waste we have, though, let's do that mass balance, and I think that's the next slide. And this is a little tough to understand, but here we have 3 different types of PFAS. These are the carboxylic acids for going from short chain to long chain, sulfonic acid, short chain to long chain, and other replacement compounds, again, going up sort of molecular weight. And what is plotted here is the ratio of the PFAS that we could find coming into the landfill, so how much we're taking in, divided by what's coming out in the leachate. So for a compound like PFOS, we were seeing that there was more than 1,000, basically 1,000 times more PFOS coming into the landfill than going out in the leachate. Other chemicals, it wasn't as, when you got down to the very short chain compound, PFBS, the green here means we couldn't account for it all. Meaning our waste didn't have much PFBS in them. And that makes sense because the types of waste we're looking at are things that are holding onto their PFAS. Sludges, they've already been through a wastewater treatment plant. They're going to be picking out the PFAS that stick to the solids. Carpeting, longer chain compounds, things that stick well. PFBS is one of those replacement compounds. It's probably in food packaging. That's probably the source of it. But since we didn't sample for that, we couldn't finish that mass balance. But the other point about this is if you look at the compounds that were regulated in Vermont, you've got PFOS, a ratio of 1,000, PFOA, ratio of about 20 times more coming in than coming out, PFNA, again about 40, and I think it's PFHXS is the other one. Again, a ratio of almost 100, or 10 there. So about 10 times from the waste that we had, more coming into the landfill. And we didn't account for everything coming in. There's a lot more PFAS coming into a landfill that's coming out in the leachate, which is where, for some PFAS, which is where I want to go with the sequestration argument. That maybe landfills are a solution to PFAS potentially. if you can solve the leachate problem. So let's continue going on. And so something we also looked at, there's a cute little paper if you want to get the reference. It was written by somebody I know well, of the PFAS cycle. But a lot of municipalities, for instance, Lebanon has a situation where they have a wastewater treatment plant and they have a landfill. And the wastewater treatment plant will produce sludges, which they put in the landfill. The landfill in turn produces leachate, which goes into the wastewater treatment plant. And this can be commercial and municipal too at the same time. But this whole idea of a PFAS cycle came out, and there were some estimates done in this paper and in other places. We're trying to look at the total amount of PFAS that went through these cycles. How much PFAS is in sludges that goes into landfills, or in sludges period, not all of them in the landfills. And then how much PFAS is in leachate. There was a national study by North Carolina State that looked at that particular question. And the numbers there are not that big. I mean, for PFAS in parts per trillion they are, but that's less than a ton per year of PFAS in leachate coming out and going in sludges. But 1 ton per year. The next slide. Oh, is there a balance? Sorry.
Do I back it up?
Yeah, no, I forgot a point. The yes and no is the answer to that. Even though those numbers mass-wise look about the same, just from that mass balance study that we saw, there are different PFAS coming out that are going in. So it's not really a cycle, it's really just mass fluxes again. Okay.
Somebody just pointed out to me that our meeting's supposed to wrap up at noon, so I don't know how much more.
I can go through it quickly.
Okay. Just not to put too fine a point, but the wastewater sludges, a lot of that is just coming from human beings, right? So it
Yes.
means that we're excreting PFAS.
Yes. And that shows that our
Not to
blood
put
levels
fine
going down over time. So yeah, we're
Okay.
a source
Yeah.
of them. That's for sure.
Also commercial users in the city.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, but also the products we're buying for our house, our laundry soap,
Yeah.
like there's so,
Yeah,
all the stuff we
everything.
put down the
Mhm.
drain.
Yeah, yeah.
Anything that would down the drain, right? Exactly. I just wanted to point out those fluxes. Remember they were in kilograms per year, about a ton per year. So here's less than a ton per year in the sludge, less than a ton per year in the leachate. This is how much of the stuff they made. Compare those numbers. We're looking at less than a ton per year in the solid waste industry, basically. And it's a small drop in the bucket compared to the whole reservoir that manufactured of these compounds. So when we focus on the solid waste industry, it's because we can measure it there, and ultimately that's what we're doing with wastewater treatment plants, that's what we affect. But we're really only looking at a small fraction of the whole PFAS that is out there in the world, somewhere, in products, or other places. So next slide. I wanted to talk a little bit about regulatory levels. This is going to affect everybody, and it's going to start with surface water standards, which New Hampshire's in the process of establishing. The surface water standards for PFAS are not going to be ecologically based, they're going to be human health based. And they're going to be at a ceiling of your drinking water standards. So you currently have a drinking water standard of 19. The water quality criteria for surface water can't be any higher because somebody could be using that surface water as a water supply. Right? So that's going to be the ceiling, will be the MCLs, but for chemicals like PFOS, which bioconcentrate in fish, the surface water standards might even be a little bit lower because you have to account for people eating fish that have taken up PFOS from the water. So this is, I think, a key part of the environmental awareness and actions on PFAS are going to come from surface water standards, because surface water standards, next slide, are going to, they'll lead into limitations on how much wastewater treatment plants can release to rivers. And those NIPTES permits are then going to back up the sources like landfills, which will have to do pretreatment to be able to dispose of their leachate. So everything is going to depend on surface water standards backing up. And EPA is in the process of doing that. Probably the states will still beat them out there in terms of some places, but this is what's going to, I think, drive everything. But now I'm going to talk about a little bit about leachate data. And I have some color-coded plots, so I'll go through these. Go back up.
Go back.
This is Vermont data. This is our active landfill. This is a recently closed landfill. These are the chemicals that are regulated in Vermont. And I put them in nice bright colors so you can pick them out. You don't see much red in there, bright red, which would be PFOS, because there really isn't a lot of PFOS in leachate. It's staying in the landfill. The highest one that you see of the regulated compounds is probably the yellow, which is PFOA. And you also see short chain compounds. This is a non-regulated compound of PFBS, PFBA I think it is. And PFBS will show up sometimes too as a short chain compound. But this color coding scheme we use on the next plot. And this is next slide is a plot of the Vermont data average versus national data. This was the data collected in 2017 and published by Morton Barlos's group at NC State. But the levels differ a little bit here, but notice the colors are pretty much the same. Kind of always the same compounds are showing up in leachate when they're measured. You see familiar characters. And again, not much red, not much PFOS, a little more PFOA. You can also see some of the the other HXS, this bright purple, but you also don't see too much of the PFNA, which is that blue bar, which isn't labeled. When they did the national study, they found this other category. There's one chemical found in leachate that isn't on the analyte list. It's a 5,3-FTCA compound. That leachate compound or concentrations are probably about double what you actually measure from the standard list. Is that a toxic compound? I don't know, but it's there because the university can identify it. Next slide. Get to Vermont or to New Hampshire data.
Steve, I'm sorry, we're really going to have to wrap it up.
Okay.
Sorry. But we'll have all your stuff online.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thing there
This
is
New
that
Hampshire.
those concentrations are much higher than the drinking water standards. So that's why landfills are going to get a lot of attention. People look at numbers and say 1,000 parts per trillion versus 10, and that's a problem. And so data look pretty similar though to the rest of the country. Not much PFOS. Next slide. And something that wastewater treatment plants do have to do is a loading study. And they did this in Michigan, and frankly, this isn't the bestest of studies. They kind of biased it a little bit. But what they tried to do is say, for a given landfill, how much of the PFAS in the landfill constituted the total output of the wastewater treatment plant. So in the case where you see the big blue bar here, in Grand Rapids, most of the PFAS coming out of the wastewater treatment plant was due to the leachate that went to that wastewater treatment plant. In other ones, it was barely perceptible. So that big focus on landfills alone is not going to be good enough for a lot of wastewater treatment plants. It's not going to be the only source. We're, somebody said, a source ourselves for the wastewater treatment plants. That makes sense?
Yeah,
sure. Next slide. There are options out there for treating leachate. I know that some of those are in investigation, for instance, at Turkey and other landfills. It's just a matter of cost. What's it going to cost and how effective it's going to be. There's one thing, there's sort of the standard methods up there and then some of the novel methods. Some of the novel methods look like they're going to be pretty good, like which one is I'm losing it here. Foam fractionation is the bottom there. It's a particularly promising method. One thing that's true of any leachate treatment method, and it's based again on the properties of the PFAS, they'll do a good job with the ones we regulate right now. Pretty much all of them will do that. When you get to the short chain compounds, they don't do as well. And so if we design systems now only to do those long chain compounds, and somebody in infinite wisdom says that we get to do short chain compounds later, we're going to be designing 2 treatment systems because it won't be adequate. That's all I think I want to say about treatment. All those things there, cost effectiveness. But I want to get into the last point, that if we do take care of the leachate, say we solidify the leachate extract, put it back in the landfill, encapsulate it, pretty much all the PFAS is gone, and it's staying in the landfill. And point 2 to the landfill industry, if you're hesitating on, for instance, not taking AFFF, which has a lot of PFOS in it, well, that PFOS is probably going to stay in the landfill. Probably not going to come out in the leachate. Or you could stabilize it to the point where it probably would not come out. So you shouldn't run away from waste, and I do think that landfills have a lot going for them from the PFAS side. One last slide I think I have. Landfill gas is a wild card. The data down there is another state being done by the NC State group. We are going to find PFAS in landfill gas. They are fluoropolymer alcohols. They're a new type of PFAS that got used after the old compounds were banned. They're volatile, so they show up in the gas phase. Did a quick mass flux estimate. Remember, we get 600 kilograms per unit of leachate. The number I'm coming up with right now, which is order of magnitude maybe correct, will be about 10 kilograms per year. but it's going out into the air, and some of it. I will come up with questions as to when you treat landfill gas, when you burn it, either in flares or icy edges, are the PFAS destroyed? We still need more research there. But it will come up, it'll probably get press. I think we just need to be prepared on the miscommunication side to talk about it. Expect it. That's it, I think.
All right, thank you very much, Steve. Sorry we're sort of running out of time here. Really interesting, and we'll put everything up on the website. Lots to think about. It sounds like with PFAS, maybe if we can reduce the sources a little bit more, we'd be better off. So thank you. So I feel horrible. I mean, I don't know who can stay a little bit longer, but I want to give the department an opportunity to talk about the draft that they produced. I don't know if you want to say anything. How you?
I can speak quickly.
Yeah. And anybody who can stay, stay, and if you can't, I understand. Thanks so much, Steve, very much.
I can talk for hours on this.
I know. Well, we may have you come back.
I guess I'll just take 2 minutes. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
I didn't really have anything prepared.
No,
because
but just say something about the process where you see it going. Just say something.
So what we did was we developed a draft outline, which was distributed to the group earlier this week. It's been posted on the Solid Waste Working Group webpage. If you've had an opportunity to look at it, you'll notice that there are 7 goals in the outline. The idea is that this is supposed to be a document that helps the Solid Waste Working Group to focus conversations. You know, the subcommittees have been meeting and talking about potential recommendations or actions that the state might take or that other stakeholders might take to move the needle on some of these issues. So what we've done is we've tried to outline kind of things that came to mind for us, for goals and then actions that fall under those goals. I'm going to say right now it's not a complete list, but it's at least a starting point, and it's something that hopefully the Solid Waste Working Group can look at and provide additional recommendations or specific things that maybe if there's a gap in something that we didn't anticipate, there might be something that we could add or elaborate on. There are 7 goals. The first goal is reducing the volume of solid waste. So that would be waste reduction. Second goal is reducing the toxicity of solid waste. Third goal is maximizing diversion. So that's things like recycling, or at least getting things that are moving up the hierarchy rather than going to a landfill. The fourth goal is bolstering recycling markets, which kind of is a subset of goal 3. You know, if you're going to be recycling, you need to have strong markets to be able to support that recycling system. Goal 5 is ensuring adequate infrastructure in the state for management of all waste, not just disposal, but across the whole hierarchy. We need to have an integrated waste management system. Goal 6 is trying to align actions and strategies with, I can't remember which one's which, climate change. And then goal 7 is actions and strategies related to environmental justice. So those are kind of the overarching goals, and then under each of those goals are potential action items, which are grouped by education and outreach. Kind of like we tried to group them into categories, like these are things that we could do for education and outreach. These are things that need to be done for promoting or incentivizing actions through, grant programs, or there are things that might be addressed through legislation, things that might be addressed through changes to state regulations like DES's rules. So that's just kind of a very brief overview of how we tried to structure it. Again, it's supposed to be something that the Solid Waste Working Group can kind of look at and see if there are ways to, some of the topics that you're discussing may already be in there. You might be able to flesh it out a little bit more or add more detail. And we also distributed it to the Waste Management Council as well, because we know that they're deeply interested in a lot of these issues. So we wanted to make sure that they had a copy. It's publicly available. It's on the Solid Waste Working Group webpage. And that's all I had to say. But Tara has a.
I just wanted to note for those that are online listening, it is in the handout section of this webinar. So if you want to grab it, you can grab it right while you're listening right now.
So Mike, just as far as process, are you gonna be continuing to work on this? I mean, I'm thinking we have maybe, what, I don't know, 4 or 5 more meetings before it's October 1st when it has to be issued, so I'm assuming you guys are gonna be working on this some more yourselves, or are you just waiting for us, or?
Yes and yes. I think we're looking at, you know, the intention of the solid waste working group is to advise the department.
Right.
And to provide recommendations. So we are going to be looking for that as part of the process. I think we're also going to be looking at general public comment. You know, we want to make sure that folks from the general public have the opportunity to comment on it as well. In terms of process, yeah, we need to have a plan by October 1st.
Right. I'm just
So-
trying to figure out how to support you best, and we're not meeting again for a month, and I hate the thought that everything just would come to a screeching halt. So that's why I was wondering, you're going to keep working on it. I mean, we did have a lot of things that we were discussing here that maybe could start to be.
I think the department might need to take a break from it for, like, we put a lot of work into just developing this. We need some input to be able to move forward. We also need to work on the biennial report.
Right.
We had to put the biennial report off
Right.
because we needed to get this out. You know, it's always a juggling
Right.
issue. So that's probably going to be our focus right now, is working on the biennial
For the
report
next month.
to get that out.
And then we all should look more deeply at the plan that you provided to us, the outline for the next meeting. So, you know, I've been, so just as a general matter, I've had people come in to do sort of the educational bits while we were waiting for our outline. So unless you guys think differently, I think that I'm gonna stop with the educational component. We can do our subcommittees. I mean, we were talking about whether we really wanna do an hour and a half, or we wanna do an hour, or do the subcommittees, take an hour and a half, dig into the plan, and then we all come together. Actually, I'm thinking about this from a notice standpoint with the state. It just gets so confusing on when the full meeting starts. Maybe we stick with the hour and a half on the subcommittees.
But we could end it in an hour.
Yeah, we can edit now, and we can come back here, or do whatever. I don't wanna waste time. But we wanna help you as much as we can, but we just have to keep it moving because our deadline is right around the corner. But at this point, you've got the biennial plan sort of sitting out there. That's a hunk you've got to finish, right? And then we can all go back to this again more deeply. I mean, the other thing that is in the back of my mind as a legislator is if there are things that are going to be recommended by this plan, our filing deadline is like early November. I think the Senate has a little bit later, but anyway, I'm just thinking about that in terms of deadlines. Plus it's summer. Okay, anybody, I mean, I had on the schedule legislative updates, this fine woman here put together a draft with all the updates from the legislature, so you can go ahead and look at those. I think the one that's really looming out there at this point that there's a lot of interest in is HB 1454, which would tighten up the requirements as far as water leachate passage from the landfills. It's passed the legislature, and at this point it's with the governor, so we'll see what happens with that. But otherwise, the list is all there from what you did. And I mentioned this advanced recycling bill, which I'll send out to the group, but it's really, I think for advanced technologies, I'd just like you to take another look at it. These things just go all sort of quickly. Okay, anything else, anybody? Does that sound like a good plan? All right. If you have thoughts along the way, also fine. I will say there are a lot of people interested in our work, so we better do a good job.
Right, no pressure.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
Yeah, have a good 3-day weekend, everybody.